This anime really threw me for a loop.
And then we'll laugh. High five.
One thing I have to applaud Summertime Rendering for when compared with other anime that do the go back in time thing is how its protagonist isn't looping through time to save/get the girl. Ushio is literally dead on arrival, and any chances Mio may have had were put out to pasture long ago. But the thing I'm getting at here is that Shinpei is actually interested in saving everyone instead of fixating on some damsel. With Tokyo Revengers, you have... With ReZero, we get... Emilio! And you could point to more examples of this within the anime umbrella, but I'll stop there. Now that it has an official release on streaming platforms in the West, I figured that it was time for the old Retrospect rodeo. And what a rootin' tootin' stallion we got here! Summertime Rendering boasts scenery highly reminiscent of the beauty routinely championed by Studio PA Works. The high detail island setting is just as cozy and gorgeous as in PA Works' recent favorite of mine, Aquatope on the White Sand, despite the, brutal murders happening all over the place. The story's rules are well defined, and it's able to avoid becoming nebulous even with new ideas accumulating on a regular basis. How Shinpei's armband functions as a sort of GPS tracker for Heine, how shadows can only live for a week unless the people they copy die, and on and on and on. There's nothing wrong with easygoing anime and casual viewing, but it sure is nice to have an anime that pays mind to the little details every once in a while. They really don't come by very often these days. The way it forces you to pay attention because of all the subtleties laced throughout any given episode ensures an engaging viewing experience from start to finish. In addition to just being good in general, the soundtrack does a standout job of setting the tone for the spooky mystery and sterling conspiracy to come. There's simply a lot of good when it comes to this anime, and combined with the fact that I'm a sucker for time travel, I felt obliged to make a video about it. So then, without further ado, this is my retrospective on Summertime Rendering. Our story begins with Shinpei in a state of waking. He receives a vision from his adoptive sister Ushio telling him to protect his other adoptive sister Mio. It's worth noting that Ushio gives him a present here, assumed to be key players. Hizuru, Nezu, and more are introduced as the story progresses through the first episode. Then we reach a point where Mio suddenly freaks out and books it from the family cafe she works at, so Shinpei chases her down and Mio reveals some rather important plot points to him. The real reason Ushio died. The nature of the shadows that are terrorizing the islanders. Shit hits the fan shortly after as Anime Among Us goes into full swing. Shadow Mio kills Hizuru after the sibling duo stumble upon her in an already dire situation, then real Mio is killed, and finally Shinpei. This is where we find out that there is a time loop, as Shinpei finds himself in the exact same waking scenario as before, and we are thrust right back to where it all begins. The story really doesn't waste any time with getting you on board.
High five!
So we are at the start of this new time loop as episode 2 begins. Before disengaging from the boat, Shinpei and Shinpei alone remembers what happened. Reading Steiner confirmed. And that isn't the only similarity to Steins Gate we're given right out the gate. Summertime is also a fan of using harsh, disorienting lighting when stumbling into a new time loop, creating a feeling like Shinpei might be experiencing a dream or maybe even a straight-up hallucination. The inspiration is clear to see. It also does this thing with the glass shards seen in Steingate's ending sequence and in the OP for Higurashi's Sotsu. Whoa now, girls, settle down there. And if that isn't enough, the second OP goes full Kaneko Ito. I'm here for all these similarities to other time travel anime though, because they're executed with tact and style. Summertime never feels like it's trying to copy anything. Rather, it forms its own identity early on and wears its influences on its sleeve to pay homage to them. It's implied right away that Shinpei's looping ability comes from his off-color right eye, which during Ushio's funeral is hinted to actually be her eye. My head hurts like it's splitting in half. My eyes are spasming, says Shinpei, cut to a close-up of Ushio's face. It's important to keep in mind the gift Shinpei receives from her in the very first scene. Remember, we don't get to see what Shinpei looks like before Ushio gives him that gift. After he fully remembers the events of the previous loop, Shinpei brings up a graphic of Nagumo Ryunosuke's Swamp Man on his trusty smartphone.
Do you have a telephone in this village?
It's a horror mystery novel about a girl in Wakayama City who thinks her friends and family have been replaced by identical copies, by imposters. When he's caught by Shadow Mio and Shadow Cop Guy and subsequently gets brutally stabbed to death, we get another loop-de-loop, but this time, it begins further ahead in time than before. This is not pointed out by exposition, by Shinpei, nor by anyone else, but it's a change I noticed immediately. After Shinpei obtains video proof of Shadow Mio and shows it to actual Mio, they both think back on how Shadow Ushio met actual Ushio 3 days before she died. This made me think where Ushio's shadow might be at that very moment. The show is busy preoccupying us with shadows of other characters in its real-time events so that we might forget about this detail until it becomes important later. After all, Ushio's shadow is only shown to us in ever so brief flashbacks and never in the present. Or is it? As early as episode 2, I was convinced this story would be a truly good mystery. I believe that a good mystery avoids spelling everything out, and summertime rendering makes me question things without nudging me to do it. I never feel that the anime makes a concerted effort to make me think about its lesser enigmas. But there I was after episode 2 ended, wondering if the Ushio shown to us at the very beginning is even the real one. There I was, wondering what the advanced starting line of Shinpei's loop might signify. Little mysteries accumulate and intertwine with subtlety and show-don't-tell methodology, then play off of each other in an effort to slowly obscure the greater mystery at large. And I fucking love it. Summertime is free of the vapid handholding and word soup in mysteries like the recent Tomodachi game. It wants the viewer to think for themselves even when a conclusion can't be confidently discerned from existing hints. It's respectful of whoever chooses to enter its domain without being haughty or ostentatious about it. To me, a mystery can't do much worse than over-explain every little thing that goes on. A good mystery trusts its viewers to pick up on clues and symbolism, then connect the dots themselves. I would rather be left with questions even after the narrative has run its course to the finish line than feel suffocated by superfluous expository dialogue about why exactly this one dude outsmarted this other dude's outsmarting. When a mystery engages in this kind of handholding, it comes off as insecure of the viewer's reasoning and insecure of its own merits, and it honestly makes me feel secondhand embarrassment. Like, hey, are you getting this part? Summertime rendering does away with these kinds of inhibitions that drag so many other mysteries through the mud. It presents everything in a way that never made me doubt that, and that's why it hooked me. That and the fact that I simp hard for Kaneko Ito's music. But we get a ton of different plot hints and shady whispers throughout the rest of the story. The cop at the cafe in episode 1 is actually a shadow because the real one shows up there instead during episode 3. Toki acts sus at the end of episode 5, then in episode 11 we discover that she's been playing personal assistant for the shadows the entire time. We learned something was up with her when she was the last to die during the festival massacre, long after the corpses of the local population are piled up to form Heine's very own all-you-can-eat buffet. But if I went and dived into even half of all the details the show has on offer, this would end up being a 30-minute video. So let's talk about the characters instead. The characters really aren't that great. They aren't awful either by any reasonable measure, but the story could have been even better if the characters themselves were better. Ushio and Shinpei are the only ones from the good guy cast to stand out, at least until Shadow Mio joins them, and the bad guy cast is even more wanting for characterization. The character designs are strong all around though, especially Ushio.
You have a very gentle face and a very erotic physique. In my country, they would go crazy. Oh my. For these two, not so much.
I do want to emphasize that while it's true most of the cast is nothing to write home about, that's really only accurate on an individual basis. On their own, Hizuru and Ryunosuke might be two-dimensional at best, but together I'd argue they make for some of the most memorable characters. Their specific dynamic is just plain cool, what with Ryunosuke literally being inside of his own sister. Where I find that the characters actually excel is in combination. The rapport exuded by Team Shinchan is nothing short of greatness, especially when you consider the obstacles they had to face to get there.
He had very little rapport with his staff and his dispatches.
Rapport. Very little rapport with his staff, fucking moron.
It's this powerful, enveloping feeling of camaraderie that makes these individually meh characters feel like a more rounded, developed cast when combined. Like, So doesn't have much of an identity outside of pining for Mio, but when it comes to beating down baddies for the lives of his friends, he's suddenly much more fun to have around. And that's not to say I think all the characters are like this. Ushio is seriously wonderful any way you decide to examine her, and Haine ends up being a multifaceted gem by the time it's all said and done. Shinpei may have put it best in episode 24 when he realizes he's won against Shide. Everyone helped me get here. Everyone's actions weren't meaningless. Everyone really was useful in their own way. With new assets and combat abilities being revealed in nearly every episode, the overarching conflict plays out like a game of chess. Well, it's more like shogi since you can reintroduce pieces to the board, and never mind that. My point is that even though the pawns aren't as strong as the rooks or the queen, they're still important when it comes to winning the game. So when Shinpei lines up that final shot and defeats Shide once and for all, it's because of everyone and their combined efforts.
And that's why friendship is the best thing ever.
Yes, friendship is great.
Brainwashing people is fun.
Yes, it is.
And what a way to close the curtain on the struggle against Shide and his weird-ass fetus Hiruko sidekick. An extremely coerced sidekick, but an effective one nonetheless. Shide's motivations are, to his credit, not as lame as I initially thought. The whole "I want to live forever" thing is obviously nothing new, but his reaction to not being able to achieve that goal is actually interesting.
You thought you could beat me, but you can't! I'm going to blow myself up now! And I'm going to take you with—
Basically, he can't live forever, so he wants to make sure that there is no forever. That time ends with him, which is exponentially more fucked up than what Hiruko is after. She just wants to go home. She needs to eat an entire town to do it, and we saw it happen, so we know that she wants to do it again. That is, until the gang goes back in time to when she first arrives on the shores of Hitogashima. Here, Hiruko has already suffered total defeat at the hands of Team Shinchan. However, as long as she washes up on that beach 300 years in the past, history will repeat itself. But by this point, Hiruko doesn't want that anymore. She's suffered enough, and she'd rather quell it all than go through the same thing again. The conflict doesn't end when Shinpei defeats Shide, and it doesn't end when everyone's escaped the Shadow World either. It ends when a little girl, one who's experienced multiple lifetimes worth of misery, simply decides that she's had enough. This episode is pure beauty. Visually, musically, and emotionally, this episode has a soul that accompanies the viewer to the end of the conflict and then all the way back to the beginning as the episode title, Summertime Re-Rendering, reveals its meaning with a familiar scene, but with infinitely more weight behind it this time. Don't forget to come find me. It's an obvious conclusion by this point given the plethora of never-ending hints the show throws at us, but that hardly mattered to me when getting to see it from Ushio's point of view. This is easily my favorite moment and episode of the anime, as it beautifully recontextualizes the first moments of the story and even the first episode's title, Goodbye Summer Days. Now I must ask you, is Summertime Rendering a worthy successor to the time travel giants that came before it? Does it deserve to follow in their footsteps? I'll leave that for you to decide. Hey guys, I hope you enjoyed that video, and if you did, please subscribe for more anime in retrospect. I'm feeling another Fate Stay Night video next, so keep your eyes peeled for that. Anyways, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.